Hi, I'm Chike Coleman. That's Chuck Koplinski. We're back for another week of talking about movies. This is Real Reviews Cinematic Underground. And this week, we are talking about a film that was very popular at the Toronto International Film Festival. A film directed by Steve McQueen. This is 12 Years
Your
a
idol?
Slave. No, not necessarily.
Your God?
No, not,
Oh, okay.
not necessarily.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was Scarlett Johansson. My fault.
Well, she was good as Barbara in Don John. So 12 Years a Slave is about pardon me. 12 Years a Slave is about Solomon Northrop. He is a musician. That is his vocation. He has a family of 2 children and a wife. At the very beginning of the movie, he is propositioned by, I don't know, are they circus performers or circus owners?
I don't
not
know.
really
We're
clear.
never really told what the deal is. They must have some sort of connection because he does actually perform and make money, we are to assume.
Right.
I would say they're just con men, really. They're slavers with a good front.
Okay. So these con men get Solomon very, very drunk, and he wakes up the next morning in a holding area. I want to call it a shed, because it looks like that, and realizes that he is now a slave. I have a lot of thoughts about this movie, but I want to defer to you first, Chuck.
That's the whole movie?
It's
a short film.
There are more things that happen in the film, Chuck, but I don't want to give it away
I've
for
seen
our
it.
audience.
Wow, this is going to be a short show. Why are you deferring to me? This is a film that I think everyone can weigh in on because it appeals to everyone. It should appeal to every viewer on an emotional level.
I would agree. For me personally, one of the things that really, really struck me was the idea of the inhumanity of society at that time. Bear in mind that this film does take place in 1841 in Washington, not New York, as the film suggests, I do believe.
Well, it starts in Washington because that's where he lives, but their proposition is that our circus is going to Washington. You have to meet us in
so
Washington.
he lives in New York and he's going to Washington.
Right, and that's where the kidnapping occurs. And I think one of the most chilling shots occurs after he has been kidnapped and is in this holding area, and the camera slowly comes up from where he's at, the facade of the house where he's at, and you come up above the rooftop and you see the entire skyline or cityscape of Washington. So, just the irony that he is in this area that was free at the time in the United States, but is still being held there as a captive. And I thought of those 3 young women who were held in Cleveland for so long by that gentleman for a decade to have this happening in plain sight. And that's what it occurred to me here as I watched this, because the irony is the other irony is that he's not the only one there. There are 2 others and a couple of children. I mean, this is a routine, a scam, a crime that these guys have thought out very well and have obviously done on numerous occasions.
And it's done repeatedly. The other thing that struck me in the opening minutes of this film, because this is about, I would say 15 minutes into the film.
Yeah, it moves very quickly.
The thing that struck me was literally Solomon being struck because he was trying to proclaim his innocence, and the absolute agony of the sound effect of him being beaten just immediately broke me within those first 15 minutes. As the story progresses, we see Solomon, I can't even begin to say the word adjusting because that's not the right term, falling prey to his circumstances and realizing for at least a while that there is no way out, even though he is still trying to proclaim his innocence and get to his freedom. He is working as a slave. I forget the name he is given, though. It doesn't stick with me. It starts with a P.
Yeah, I don't remember that either, because there were so many other things that struck me about it within that first half hour as well, that I forget that. As you say, it's an incredibly rich movie. One thing that I just want to bring up before I forget it is that we are so far away from stereotypes here as far as the slaves in the film are concerned. They're all are presented as very intelligent,
Yes.
very articulate. There's none of this yes ma'am, no ma'am, oh mammy crap, that we've been inundated with since the beginning of film.
I agree.
And obviously we have made steps before that, but this seems to be a completely different look at it in the way these people are portrayed as noble.
They're portrayed as human beings,
They're-
flat out.
But even more than that. I mean, you've got to be more, I think, than that in the way that they have to attempt to maintain their sense of being, their character, their spirit, because that's when that is broken, then they're gone.
Yeah.
It's not put enough emphasis on the physical abuse they take, because that's horrendous. But it seems to me that his biggest battle, and all the biggest battle for all of them, is to keep their spirit alive, their spirit of hope. That's the biggest thing, I think.
I don't disagree with you.
Especially that one young lady that he's living with.
Yes. Is
Who-
that Patsy?
Whose children are sold away from her. I mean, her
That
struggle
wasn't
with
Patsy,
that.
though. That was someone
whoever
else.
it was. I mean, her struggle with that.
Yeah.
I mean,
her
it is the
constant
most arduous
sadness
thing. Yes.
because of the loss of her children.
And that was an interesting scene when he accuses her of, basically tells her to stop crying.
Yeah.
And she snaps back at her, and there's really and what she brings up is that there's no right or wrong way to mourn your situation.
Yeah.
Basically she's saying, you got to let me do this the way I want to do it, and you do it the way you, and
Yeah.
it is what it is. But of course, she can't recover, and she's gone. I mean, one scene she's there, the next she's gone, and that was also pretty horrendous as well, to think that, like that,
Yeah.
you're gone.
Another thing that I really, really, I want to focus on one moment within this film, the moment that really just put me at my most raw. There are actually two of them. And you mentioned one of these to me before, but I don't want to go to that one first. There's a scene where Solomon is being punished for something he did, and the punishment for his rebellion against his master, and I use that term very loosely, is hanging. And the director, Steve McQueen, is very famous for taking a moment and holding on it for as long as possible. You see Solomon hanged. You see him struggling to keep his feet up.
Yeah, it's not a true hanging. Someone intercedes, cuts him down, but not far enough, and he's standing on his tiptoes.
To stay alive,
right,
so that his neck does not break. And you see everything else going on around Solomon.
Yeah.
And no one coming to save him, because they know if they do anything, give him water.
But the one woman does.
One woman does. Give him food, try to free him. They will be in a worse hell than he is at the current moment.
And it has to be pointed out that this goes on for a good chunk of one day. Into the evening, we're talking hours. For me, it was the key moment of the film. It is the key, because as you point out, they just go about their day, in the background. They go about their work, almost as if this is not unusual. It is a part of just the way things are. And there are other moments like that in the film too, which I think are the most powerful parts of it, because it shows just how ingrained this institution is within these people's lives and within society. They don't bat an eye. When someone gets abused, they don't bat an eye when one of them gets slapped or is treated like a piece of cattle. It's just, this is the way it is. And I think that this movie does that better than any other.
I think this film succeeds because it explores the inhumanity of society back at that time.
Right.
It shows the ugliest part of our history, number one. Number two, the thing that I was most struck by is not only does it explore the ugliest part of our history and the inhumanity of human beings, but it also looks at how the people who were suffering at the hands of these people felt, how it all looked, how everyone knew what was going on was wrong or improper, but in a sense, for the people who were being enslaved, were powerless to change it.
Well, but they didn't think it was wrong. And that's what I think is so good about the film. I mean, he portrays this society as, this is not wrong to them. And that, to me, is what's so powerful, that having this institution around affects everyone's morality in one degree or another, to the point to where it's not seen as being a sin or a crime. The Paul Giamatti character, I think, is the perfect example. He's a slaver. He sells them, and it's how he makes his money.
It's a weird thing because the people who are being enslaved are like, this is the way it has to be. You cannot reveal your true identity. I love that Solomon was learning the rules of how to stay alive and survive. Mm-hmm. And all the while his spirit was breaking because of all these beatings and all of this abuse and everything that was going on in his life, he did still have one constant that was in his life that probably kept him going for a while at least, and that was his music. Because people eventually did discover his talent for the violin.
And it's a film of just such stark images. I can't get out of my head before he sold a group of African Americans, 5 or 6 of them standing around a single bucket, washing themselves. Yeah. And above, white people and again, it's just a common everyday thing there. You talk about his spirit being broken almost. There's that scene where they're singing a spiritual, I believe, at a funeral.
That's where you can see.
And you talk about McQueen's long takes. In my mind, this is the best long take because you see him despairing, but then as he sings the song, I mean, great performance by him in this single moment. You see him getting strong again.
He gets empowered.
And that I loved. I loved that moment. Mm-hmm. I mean, just a brilliant piece there.
There's another section with a character played by Garrett Dillahunt. And we should mention here that Solomon Northup, Chiwetel Ejiofor gives a masterful performance.
He's probably going to win the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you'd be hard-pressed to argue against him.
Yeah. There's a scene with Garrett Dillahunt involving getting a letter to his family or getting a letter to anyone who knows him to say, get me out of this situation. And he gets immediately ratted out by this person for a higher position. And, of course, the whole interaction with trying to find out who do you trust with the information you have about who you know as a core of a human being you are.
Yeah, and also, again, this whole institution affecting everyone's morality, it includes the slaves as well. Yeah. Because you would think, we're all in the same boat here, let's help each other out. But as you point out, that's not necessarily the case. Any little thing I can do to help myself, some of them went that route. I guess I have only one real problem with the film.
Okay.
And that's Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
And it's not has anything to do with his talent. He does a fine job with his group. And his Plan B Productions were one of the production houses that helped get this produced. So kudos to him.
Right.
It's just that when he shows up, it's like, oh wow, there's Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
He can't break that spell.
You can't unsee that. You could make him as ugly and as rank as possible.
Yeah.
And it still doesn't.
He's still a movie star, and it kind of breaks the spell there momentarily. Fortunately, he only has a couple scenes.
Yeah.
And like I say, he does a fine job with them, but it just.
And I will say that he is Solomon's saving grace in more than one way.
Yeah, and I really like that that back and forth between them. Like I say, I think they only have 2 conversations.
Right.
But they're very, very important.
There are 2 characters that I really, really want to focus on, and I don't know which to go to first. So I'm going to go with the most evil of the 2. And that's Michael Fassbender's slave owner.
Yes, the Solomon Legree of the piece.
Oh, my.
Or Simon Legree of the piece.
There's so much I could say about Michael Fassbender as a performer in general in any of the films that I've seen him in with Steve McQueen. But for this particular role, he became so despised by me.
Well, he did his job then.
I know. That the level of cruelty and that he exhibited towards the people enslaved was not uncommon by any stretch of the means.
Do you think he overplayed the part?
That's a very good question.
There are a couple moments there where...
I do think he overplayed it just a bit.
I'm not sure. I need to see it again. he either overplays it or he just goes right up to that line.
Yeah. I think it might be the latter, where he just goes right up to that
Yeah.
line, because he uses scripture to what's the word I'm looking for?
Justify himself.
Justify his actions with the slaves.
And I didn't mind that, but the one scene, I think the other scene you were going to mention, the
Yeah, we'll get to
that's
that
the
in a
moment
second.
where I think, boy, he might go over the line.
Yeah.
But he is, and what's interesting is you're right. You say he's the villain of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is that they give him the motivation. We understand why he is, and it doesn't make us sympathize with him in any
Right.
stretch, but we understand why he's doing what he's doing. There's a lot of insecurity there.
Yeah, he's bound by two women in this film.
Right, right. And he hates himself because he is attracted to the slave.
Right.
We see that in the one scene in which they're making love. His reaction at the end, you can tell he despises this within him, and that's why he takes it out on everyone else.
Can I ask a question, because I didn't understand this? Why does he slap the slave after that session?
Because he hates himself for
And
being
he wanted to
attracted
take it out on
her.
her?
You bet.
Okay.
She's the object of not only his lust, but also his hate.
I think what happens with his wife, played by Sarah Paulson, is even more grotesque in the dancing scene.
Yeah, and poor Sarah, the part she gets, I mean, is
Oh,
hardly an attractive role either.
Alfre Woodard really doesn't have much to do in this film, though
You know
she
what?
does show a different side of that life where you can go.
And yeah, because she plays a former slave who, and if I understood this correctly, because it's not really spelled out completely, who marries someone who owns a plantation, a white man. Did I understand that? The neat thing about movies like this is that it makes me then want to do more research, and I would want to see, did that actually happen, and if so, how often were there instances of that happening? Because she runs the place.
Yeah, she has a pointed position in there
Completely.
that I thought was interesting, and it was good to see that other side of what plantation life was. And I also want to mention how this was shot in terms of looking at the plantation. They didn't shoot a wide, expansive shot to show you all that was there. They focused in the house, the field, the swampy areas. They didn't show you the wide expanse of how expansive this plantation could be. They showed you areas, which I thought was really effective in making it a very claustrophobic setting.
Yeah, it underscores how trapped they are.
It really does. It really does.
And back to the Woodard thing, and I don't think that you can have a conversation about this film without eventually having to have a conversation about Django Unchained, which was just last year.
Right.
In that film, the Samuel L. Jackson character obviously has moved to a position of some influence,
Right.
where he's at, and I couldn't help but compare it in my mind to what we're presented with here with her character.
I agree.
And then what happens there. And again, I'd really love to find out more about how often that occurred. Maybe we can do the Django thing later in the show, but I mean, we're talking apples and oranges as
Agreed.
far as how it looks at this whole issue.
The other person that I wanted to cover, and I'm really anxious to talk about the scene with you, is the character of Patsy.
Mm-hmm.
I've not seen a more heartbreaking character on film other than Solomon Northup and his situation in the character of Patsy for Ndoye Adoye. I think that's her name.
If you say so.
She is just a heartbreaking character in this film. She is every essence of what is beautiful about a person, and every essence about what horrors a person has to go through is represented so beautifully within this character of Patsy. I should mention here that Patsy is one of the slaves that Michael Fassbender's master favors, the main slave that he favors.
I think it's the only,
The object of his affection.
Yeah.
Very much so. And there's a moment in this film where Solomon, well, I should backtrack a bit.
She disappears. Is that what you're
Solomon
talking about?
is, no, there's another thing before that. Solomon is asked early on in his friendship with Patsy to kill her, because of the level of cruelty that she finds that his wife exhibits to Patsy and that Master exhibits to Patsy. Solomon says, no, I won't do it. Later on in the film, towards the end, he is confronted with that situation.
Yeah, again. Yeah.
And that, to me, if I wasn't already broken by watching Solomon be beat at the beginning of the film, and I wasn't already broken by watching Solomon get hanged in the film, I was broken by watching Patsy be disciplined. And disciplined in the worst possible way for an act that most of us take for granted. Mm-hmm. She was getting something, and I will spoil what she was getting. She was getting soap for herself to be clean, and she's disciplined for that because the Master did not know where she was.
Right. Mm-hmm.
She is first whipped by Solomon, though he is very begrudging in terms of wanting to do the act. And then when he fails to do it in Master's way properly, Master takes over and does the whipping for her. And I wondered, when I was watching that scene, are they going to show us what is happening to Pat? Are they going to show us
how graphic are they going to be?
Yeah, how graphic are they going to be? How much are they going to show? And they show her being whipped. But not just that. There's a little tiny detail that I noticed that took my heart that extra break, which is when she's being whipped over and over and over again, you can see the specks of blood fly off her skin. Mm-hmm. And I've never felt more hollow, more somber, more saddened than watching that image occur for maybe the 30 to 45 seconds it's shown on screen. Chuck, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, I think that it's interesting that McQueen is a British director. And I think it required someone who was an American to be able to show this in the way that he does here, this scene being one of the moments that we were talking about. Someone not married to our history, someone who has no vested interest, who can show it for what we've read about it being the way that it is. And, you know, this is, of course, the scene in which he really lets it all, you know, be put on display. It's a heartbreaking scene in many ways. And it was that moment as well that I kept thinking, you know, and obviously this may be an ignorant statement, and I don't know how often occurred, but when at one moment do you just finally revolt? You know, at that moment I would think, you know what? But then again, it's so ingrained in them not to, that I guess that was the thing that kept them in line. Because at that moment I would think, okay, well, you're dead. We just have to kill you no matter what happens to us.
Yeah.
We've got to take the whoop to you and string you up and, well, be
Are you
damned
talking
the
about the
consequences.
slaves revolting and doing that to the Master?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would think at that moment, we're done. But again, it's so ingrained in them not to, that, you know, in hindsight we can't, or I can't, you know, put any sort of blame on them. Though I would imagine it had happened at some point or another. There were occasions.
I don't doubt of what you speak. I will say that what you suggest does, to me, personally, that is a slightly ignorant statement, because from watching what we've seen and from the other slave-based movies that I've encountered, including the Roots miniseries, which we haven't at all mentioned yet, that doesn't seem possible or even remotely feasible, unless you did wish death upon yourself, in which case, feel free to take that one last moment of vengeance, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But then, at that point, lashing out in that way, I have to think they would lose a part of themselves if they did. I mean, yes, it is. That does mean you get some sort of revenge. But what good is that revenge if taken in that way?
I think we're past that. I think at that point, we're past that. Nat Turner's rebellion. I remember this. Killed his master's family as they were sleeping. August 1831. A small band of 70 slaves moved from house to house, eventually killing over 50 wives. It took a militia force to put down the rebellion, and Nat Turner and 55 other slaves were captured and later executed.
Okay, so it did occur in history. Mm-hmm. I have a few final thoughts on this film before we go. And I know I only have a few minutes left here. But first of which is, for those of you that are afraid to see this film because of its subject matter, don't be. We have to watch our history in order to understand it and not repeat the mistakes of the past. I think that for those of you who are saying, 12 Years a Slave is just not the movie for me because it's too graphic, it's too violent. If you choose to walk down that path, that is your decision. But in doing so, not only will you miss one of the finest films of this year, but you will also resign yourself to not knowing a part of history that is very ugly and deserves to be examined in the way it was examined here.
Hard viewing, but required viewing.
It's required viewing because, in my mind, 12 Years a Slave is one of those pictures that allows you to not only understand in a small way the predicament that Solomon was put in, but also look at humanity now and see how much it's changed for the better. I mean, looking out today, we have gay marriage being approved. Mm-hmm. We have the health rights for those who are African American, Latino, that are there, despite the oddities of Obamacare. A lot of things have changed, but if we choose to ignore movies like this that try to tell us about our history, we will never truly change as a country and as a society. That's what I have to say about this film. Chuck, any final words?
Nope.
Okay. So with that, we will see you next week. Keep watching and enjoying movies. I'm Chike, that's Chuck. We'll see you later.